Hello, class. So today I want to continue our look at measurements and specifically discuss the metric system and, more importantly, the metric prefixes. So the metric system as a whole, right, is the base 10 system, and the prefixes allow us to express big and small numbers in smaller quantities, right? And so, or in less number of them. So for example, instead of saying we have 1,000 meters, right, we might say we have 1 kilometer. Right? And so it's a way to express a large number of something as a smaller number of a prefixed unit. And we have prefixes that represent certain base 10 multipliers. Now, normally these are about every 3 multiples of 10 until we get, unless we're really close to around 0, right? But you can see they go up generally 3, 6, 9, 12, etc. and down. So we don't have one for every multiple of 10, but typically every 3 multiples. Now, I will emphasize this. You need to know these multipliers and how to use them, right? This table or any other table of the metric prefixes will not be supplied on an exam. So let's just look through this and do a few examples on working with these metric prefixes and converting between them. So first thing is, how do we read this table? Well, the way that we read it is that we have 1, right, of the prefix unit equals a multiplier amount of the non-prefixed unit. So for example, as I said, 1 kilometer equals 1,000 or 10 to the third meters of unprefixed, or 1 microgram equals 1 times 10 to the minus 6th grams, or a millionth of a gram. And so that's how we read the table. Now, I know some of these you may have learned other relationships that are likely the same relationship, just maybe stated in the reverse form. So I'll take a look at that here in the first example, just so you can see. And it's okay to use those, as long as they're the correct conversion. So, for example, if I have 120 meters, and I want to express this as a number of centimeters. So the process I'm always going to follow is I'm going to start with the value that I know. So I know that I have 120 meters. And then I'm going to use this, what we call conversion factor, or the equality within our prefix system. So I want to go between meters and centimeters. And what I know from my prefixes is that 1 centimeter is equivalent to 0.01 or times 10 to the negative 1 times 10 to the negative second meter. So now I can do this conversion by applying this conversion factor, right? That 1 centimeter is equivalent to 1 times 10 to the minus 2 meters. Now, there's a specific way that I set this up, right? Since my original units were meters, I put the matching to my original unit on the bottom, right? So that it cancels out, and my target unit always goes on top. So if I go through and I do this, we're going to end up with 12,000 centimeters, or you could write this as 1.2 times 10 to the 4th centimeters if you want to put this into scientific notation. Now, some of you are probably wondering, well, I learned in school that 100 centimeters is in a meter. That is perfectly valid. That is just looking at this ratio in the opposite way, and you're perfectly able to do that. So if I could do the same thing, but instead of doing this, I would say that there is 100 centimeters, and every 1 meter, my meters still cancel. And if I do my math, I would end up at the same place. So sometimes there can be multiple conversions here, or different ways to state the same conversion. And if you do know any of these, for some of these more common prefixes, you're welcome to use them. So let's look at a couple more examples. So we have 5,245 millimeters. And I want to convert that into, milliliters. And I want to convert that into liters. So liters is a volume scale, right? It is not part of the base units, but it is a common scale that we use to measure volume of liquids. And we can apply the prefixes just as the same way. Now, so milli, right, is 10 to the minus third. So since I want milliliters on the bottom and liters on the top, if I read this, 1 milliliter is 1 times 10 to the minus third liters. So my milliliters cancel, and when I do my math, I end up with 5.245 liters. And lastly here, I got 725.6 seconds, and I want to convert it into nanoseconds. So it's going to follow the same pattern where I have my original unit on the bottom to cancel, I have my target unit on the top, and from looking at my table I know that 1 nanosecond is equal to 1 times 10 to the minus 9th is nano seconds. So I cancel this out, I do my math, and I end up with 7.256 times 10 to the 11th nanoseconds. And part of doing these conversions, right, is understanding that they make sense, right? Does it make sense that we should have a whole bunch of nanoseconds compared to how many seconds that is? Well, sure, because a nanosecond is a very small unit, right? So it is 1/billionth of a second. So it makes sense that if I'm going to have a whole bunch of them as compared to seconds, right? Seconds is a bigger unit, so there's going to be less of them. So if we're sort of having the same quantity in these different units, right? The larger the unit, the fewer there's going to be of them, right? So here we had milliliters, we had 5,245 milliliters, but to express it with no prefix, right, since this is a small one, we would expect to have a larger number of liters, a smaller number of liters, and that's what we have, right? So we have only 5 liters. So we're going to have, to express the same number, we're going to have bigger quantities of these smaller prefixes at the bottom, smaller quantities of these bigger prefixes at the top. Now, one last sort of topic to look at here is, what if we're making a measurement and we don't quite sure know the best unit to use to express it, right? So, for example, if we made a measurement and it was a really small number of meters, right? So we measured something and it was 1.06 times 10 to the minus 10th meters, right? With what prefix should we express that measurement to make it reasonable? Well, the basic idea is we want to use a prefix that is either equal or smaller to whatever my exponent value here. So if I'm here on 10 to the minus 10th, I'm right over here. So I could use nano, but it's going to give me less than 1 nanometer. So I usually want to use equal or smaller. So, well, pico is 10 to the 12th, so it's going to give me hundreds of picometers, right? There's 2 units. And so that's what we end up with, right? So this would be equivalent to 106 or 1.06 times 10 to the second. This should be, this should be positive 2 to the second picometers. And so the general rule of thumb is we want to express a quantity in ones, tens, hundreds, thousands of whatever the unit is. Right? If we start getting into expressing it in bigger or smaller than that, maybe we want to use a different prefix to express it. All right, so metric prefixes, work with them, learn them. The more practice you do on these convertings, the more able you will be to convert within the metric system.